Welcome to the first lecture for anatomy and physiology for the spring. We're going to start with the endocrine system. So if you recall, in this fall, we did a couple of organ systems. We've talked about the integumentary system. So most of the ones on the left over here. So integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous system are what we focused on in the fall. We also got an overview and introduction to things like structure and function, homeostasis, cell signaling, things like that. So a lot of that is going to be integrated in this semester. So we've kind of done this one, but when I check them off, you still need to know a lot about them, especially this one. So the biggest thing about 312, the second semester of anatomy and physiology, is that it's very integrative. It relies on prior knowledge from last semester. So autonomic nervous system is the biggest and clearest example of that, but I'll be referring to osteoblasts and osteoclasts. I'll refer to skeletal muscle function. Can't think of anything specific in the skin right now, but some glands. I'm mentioning exocrine glands again. Tissues, different types of tissues, that kind of stuff. So please review as needed and be aware that we're going to build on from that. So we are going to touch upon each of these remaining systems in the spring. We're going to focus on some more than others. So for example, we'll spend a little bit less time on lymphatic and more time on cardiovascular. We're going to start with endocrine. So endocrine is glands that produce hormones. And it's one of my favorites. And so the other thing to remember is, as we move on, is that all these organ systems work together to maintain homeostasis. Endocrine and nervous system are two of the ones that really control the others to regulate homeostasis. All of the systems work together, but these two are control systems. So they regulate. So remember, we've talked about nervous system quite a bit already. First of all, they seem pretty different, these two systems. Look at them. They look very different. This one's got this system of nerves. This one's got these specific glands that are very separate and spread throughout the entire body. I want to start with these control systems as a way to talk about the endocrine system and what's similar about these two control systems. Well, they both coordinate body functions, right? They both sense changes in the body and respond to those changes in order to maintain homeostasis. Could you think of a few more specifics that's similar about them? So let's see, they both use chemical messengers. The chemical messengers are called different things and function differently. So in the nervous system, they require action potentials. In the endocrine system, they're spread through the blood. So signaling molecules to communicate. The signal molecule binds to a receptor. Of course, that's what signaling molecules pretty much do. So, right, this is a signal receptor. That's how things communicate. So receptors are an important part of both systems. And then they both coordinate body functions. And lastly, they're both regulated by negative feedback. So we've talked quite a bit about the nervous system, right? We spent some time on that. So what I'd like you to do next is actually draw for yourself a stimulus response pathway with what you know best. So the nervous system, right? And so you can draw this pathway really generically without even using any organs. Do you remember how to do that? So what are the components we need here? We need a stimulus. We need a receptor. We need an integrator. Remember this? We need a target or effector. and we need a response. Those are the components of our stimulus response pathway. If it's a feedback loop, this response would go back and turn off the stimulus. Right now, I don't want to actually deal with feedback, even though it's an important component of both the nervous and endocrine systems. So our stimulus is going to stimulate the receptor. That's going to send the signal to the integrator, which is going to signal the target or effector and cause a response. So the integrator that we talked about from last semester was pretty much always the central nervous system, right? From the fall. That's what we talked about. The other thing an integrator can be, and I believe we saw an example of this. I believe I mentioned the pancreas with blood glucose and parathyroid, I mentioned, that produces parathyroid hormone to regulate blood calcium levels. So the integrator could also be an endocrine gland. And that's why I'm bringing it up again here. So for the nervous system, a neural reflex, this looks like this. I just drew this out this time. So same components here. And this would be here, the CNS. I'm actually going to erase this from up here just because, let's just cross that out of there. Okay. The target could be the heart, the skeletal muscle. This receptor could be in the skin, it could be a muscle spindle, etc. So what does this look like, the stimulus response pathway with the endocrine system? Oftentimes, a simple endocrine reflex pathway looks like this. I say simple because we're going to get to, of course, examples that aren't simple. So stimulus, our sensor integrating center is often one thing. So this is the example with the parathyroid, the pancreas. It's one organ that both senses and integrates that information, then sends the signal to the target. One thing I want to add to both these pictures is what these dashed lines are. So remember these input signals and output signals. And in the central nervous system, a neural reflex, what are these? You should know this. This is going to be your sensory or afferent neuron. And this is going to be your motor or efferent neuron. Okay, so what is our output signal for an endocrine pathway? It's a hormone. Always a hormone, because the definition of an endocrine gland is it's producing hormone. The sensor integrator is always an endocrine gland if we're talking about the endocrine system. Again, there's going to be exceptions when we get the complex pathways. So the output signal is always going to be a hormone. So examples of targets would be the things that are targeted by those hormones. So the pancreas produces insulin or glucagon to regulate blood sugar in cells. The osteoclasts or osteoblasts that are targeted by the parathyroid hormone, etc. Okay, so putting that kind of in context with what you know already, let's next talk about ways in which the nervous and endocrine system are different. Now, I have this written as a learning check. I want you to do the best you can. So first, you may be able to just pause and think of things that are different about them. I've already mentioned some, right? If you need help, you can fill out this table. So these are some of the specifics in which they differ. So please pause the video and fill this out as best you can. So for the nervous system, what is the message? What's the signal? Well, there's kind of two ways to answer this. I'm going to put both. So the message is carried by action potentials, but then from cell to cell, there also are neurotransmitters. So that is that typically that chemical messenger. There are electrical synapses as well that we will actually briefly come back to when we talk about the heart. Neurotransmitter. What's the message for the endocrine system? Well, hormones. An endocrine gland produces hormones. That's what it does. So how are these transmitted? This is going to be through neurons. If you didn't know exactly what I meant by these things, you put something different, it might still be correct. It'd be something to put in your homework, in your response to this. Don't just copy my table. Please put what you answered and maybe ask, is this right? Also, this is a different way of answering this question. Or I just didn't get this right. Endocrine system, transmission via the bloodstream. So the definition of a hormone is that it travels through the bloodstream. We'll review types of chemicals of signaling in the next video. Target for the nervous system is very localized. For this, if you put specific targets, that's fine. Here, I kind of want general. It's very localized. So it's neuron to neuron, or neuron to one muscle, right? Or even a group of muscle fibers, or a gland, right? Very localized though, that's synapse. The target for the endocrine system is any cell that has the receptor. So very widespread, and because it's traveling to the bloodstream, that's everywhere in the body. It's going to be specific to things that have the receptor though. Speed of response for nervous system, what do you think? Very quick. And it's short lasting. Boom. Action potential, neurotransmitter, released, done. Muscle twitch, example of that. Endocrine is slower to respond because we're traveling through the bloodstream here, and then it's longer lasting. It's going to take longer for that signal to go away. Last one, how do you increase the signal intensity? If you want more than just a twitch of muscle, how do you get that? More than just a little tick. You have more action potentials. So frequency increases, right? Because you can't have a larger action potential. You know, it's not a thing. Action potentials all or nothing, one size. More frequent action potentials will cause my arm to disappear and move around. If you want more signal in the endocrine system, you're going to produce more hormone produced, released, etc. So those are different, important, different aspects of the two. And these comparisons really change how the two things function. Okay, one nice picture to summarize this information is here. Here is kind of just a visual summarizing those two different ways of signaling. So here is neuronal signaling, and there are target cells. So that could either be another neuron, a muscle, a gland. A few other examples exist. The distance of this signal is very small within micrometers, so very localized, short distance of effect. Endocrine signaling, on the other hand, over here, so if it's from the pancreas, for example, it's traveling throughout the bloodstream, and the distance that signal can travel is much larger, so centimeters. Example of hypothalamus pituitary, a localized blood pathway, but typically meters. I'm over a meter tall, so in the range of meters if it's being released by your gonads and traveling up to your brain, for example. Okay, so what we've done so far here today is describe the major functions of the endocrine system and predict whether a given response would involve primarily endocrine or nervous system control. These endocrine or nervous is going to depend on whether that function needs to be localized, quick, that kind of thing. We did some of these in the fall as well. Developmental processes are typically endocrine. Quick responses tend to be nervous system. Second, we compare and contrast the nervous and endocrine system, how they control body functions, the pathways they reach their signals, what determines the targets, so receptors versus kind of localization, the speed of the response, duration of response, and the signal intensity coding. So that's the actual potential frequency versus amount of hormone. Okay, there's video 1.